Hello, everyone. Good morning. It's Janae here. I am back with another live video. Today, I will be studying the presidency and how to be president. So, there's a lot of reading that I have to cover, and I will be going through probably half of the reading for today. Let's check the number of pages. So, 54. 55, 25, 25, 25, 50. So there are 30 pages here. So I'm probably going to get through maybe 15 pages today. We're going to be reading all about the president. Yesterday I did some research on president, and I did some reading with Barack Obama. I know he's former president, and then also our current president, Donald Trump. And I found out like some information. As we all know, they say that Donald Trump has the television personality and that he's a businessman. So I learned that about him. And I mean, he really is a businessman, like the different hotels that he has, the resorts that he has, and other businesses him and his family owns. Very wealthy man he is. Even when he was a child, at 8 years old, he was already a millionaire. So very wealthy male. And then learning about Barack Obama is like the things that he had, he really like worked for. Like he had the gift. He had a very intelligent parents. His dad was pretty smart. His mom ended up with a doctorate's degree. So she was pretty smart. And he was very active, and he got really good jobs, and he did really well. He was always on top of everything, and he excelled. And I think it's great. Yeah, my heart went out to Donald Trump last night, though. I was crying a little bit, just praying for him. Again, people say things about him and like kind of joke about him, but I feel like God made Donald Trump the way that he did. Like he wanted him to have that television personality. And he ended up using that, I'm sure, in the business. And I'm sure that made him even more wealthy. And another thing I found out, though, about Donald Trump, I guess he didn't really need a higher education, such as a doctorate's degree, but he ended up with like a bachelor's. I don't know if he like excelled since then. Like maybe Wikipedia needs to update their profile, but it says he has a bachelor's degree and he's our president. And he's also a businessman, and he knows money and he knows the business. And I guess he has what he needs to be president. He's rich. He's a billionaire. But I'm going to get started. The topic is going to be the president. So we're going to be learning all about the president. And I'm going to try to get through the 15 pages. First time going through the text, so I'm sure I'll probably come across words that I don't know. And then I'll just use my phone to look up information that I'm unfamiliar with. But I hope y'all enjoy this session. So let's get started. Here I have an introduction. I'm going to start with that, and then I'm going to start to read about who can become president. So it says here, the writers of the Constitution created the presidency of the United States without any models to follow. Nowhere else in the world was there a democratically selected chief executive. What the founders did not want was a king. Given their previous experience with royal governors in the colonies, many constitutional convention delegates wanted a very weak executive who could not veto legislation. Other delegates, especially those who had witnessed the need for a strong leader in the Revolutionary Army, believed a strong executive was necessary. Overall, however, the delegates did not spend much time discussing actual matters to be granted to the president, leaving those questions to the Committee on Detail. The delegates created a chief executive who had enough power granted in the Constitution to balance those of Congress. The power exercised by each president has been scrutinized and judged by historians. political scientists, the media, and the public. The personalities and foibles of each president have also been investigated and judged by many. Indeed, it would seem that Americans are fascinated by presidential powers and by the powers who hold office. In this chapter, after looking at who can become president and at the process involved, we will examine closely the nature and extent of the constitutional powers held by the president, including whether the president can decide which records can be made public and which aides might testify before Congress, as discussed in the opening feature. And so I actually did read like the opening feature, and it talked a little bit about like information that can be like withheld from the public. So like private information that the president has and like how they can kind of protect themselves. And I kind of read a little bit about Congress, how Congress has that power to be able to voice their opinion, and they can like slander people's name and scrutinize it and not get punished or penalized. So they get like extra special privileges. And so I think it's the same way with president. The president gets like extra special privileges. So I'll read like a little bit just to kind of catch y'all up to speed. So this one, it says, if executive privileges were eliminated, without executive privilege, a president would have to be aware of all his or her words, documents, and actions could be made public. We know from 20th century history that when a president does not have full executive privilege to protect information, the results can be devastating. President Nixon, Richard Nixon, served 1969 to 1974, tape recorded hundreds of hours of conversations in the Oval Office. During the Watergate scandal, Congress requested those tapes. Nixon invoked executive privilege and refused to turn them over. Ultimately, the Supreme Court ordered him to comply. The tapes provided damning information about Nixon's role in the purported cover-up of illegal activities. Rather than face impeachment, Nixon resigned the presidency. If the executive privileges were eliminated, it is unlikely that conversation between the president and other members of the executive branch ever would be recorded or otherwise documented. As a result, we would have fewer records of the administration activities. So that's just like a brief highlight of what the introductory background information was about. So you can see like the president kind of refused to hand over videotapes that was recorded. And so he ended up kind of stepping down from that position. But you can just kind of see like there's some more information here if y'all need it. But I think I'm going to go ahead and move on. So there was a word I stumbled over while reading, and it was foibles. I'm going to look that up because I don't know what that is. Foibles. Foible. So it says a minor weakness or eccentricity in someone's character. And I'm going to use the Platonic so that we can hear how it sounds.
Foible.
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 Foible. So who can become president? The requirements of becoming president as outlined in Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution are not overwhelmingly stringent. Y'all know what that word means? Stringent. It sounds like stringent, like holding something. Let's see what it says. So stringent, of regulations, requirements, or conditions. Strict, precise, or exacting. I like strict or firm or rigid. That's kind of what I was leaning towards. It says, what is a stringent person? Tight, constricted, marked by rigor, strictness, or severity, especially with regard to rule or standard. Stringent, decontamination procedures. So I'll read that again here, the introduction. Who can become president? The requirements for becoming president, as outlined in Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution, are not overwhelmingly stringent. No person except a natural-born citizen or a citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of this Constitution shall be eligible to the office of president. Neither shall any person be eligible to that office who shall not have attained to the age of 35 years and been 14 years a resident within the United States. The only question that arises about these qualifications relates to the term natural-born citizen. Does that mean only citizens born in the United States and its territories? What about a child born to the U.S. citizen or to a couple who are U.S. citizens visiting or living in another country? Although the Supreme Court has never directly addressed the question, it is reasonable to expect that someone would be eligible if her or his parents were Americans. The first president, after all, were not American citizens at birth, and others were born in areas that did not join the United States until later. These questions were debated when George Romney, who was born in Chihuahua, Mexico, made a serious bid for the Republican presidential nomination in the 1960s. Similar questions were raised about the 2008 Republican candidate, John McCain, who was born in Panama on an American military base. Those questions were quickly dismissed because it was clear that children born abroad to American citizens are considered natural-born Americans. From time to time, movement arose to allow naturalized citizens to be eligible to run for the presidency, but these have had no success. The American dream is symbolized by the statement that anybody can become president of the United States. It is true that in modern times, presidents have included a haberdasher, Harry Truman for a short period, a peanut farmer, Jimmy Carter, and an actor, Ronald Reagan. But if you examine the list of presidents in the appendix, you will see that most common previous occupations of presidents in this country have been that of lawyer. Of the 43 presidents, 26 have been lawyers, and many have been wealthy. Fewer lawyers have become president in the last century, in part because senators who are likely to be lawyers have had a difficult time being elected president. Although the Constitution states that the minimum age requirements for the presidency is 35 years, most presidents have been much older than when they assumed office. John F. Kennedy, at age 43, was the youngest elected president. The oldest was Donald Trump at age 70. The average age at inauguration has been 54. The selection of presidents reflect a clear demographic bias. Until 2009, all have been white male and from the Protestant tradition, except for John F. Kennedy, who was a Roman Catholic. The inauguration of Barack Obama, a man of mixed race and of Kenyan and American ancestry, was an extraordinary milestone in American history. Presidents have been men of great stature, such as George Washington, and men in whom leadership qualities were not so pronounced, such as Warren Harding. A presidential candidate usually has experience as a vice president, senator, or state governor. Former governors have been especially successful at winning the presidency. They can make the legitimate claims to have executive experience and electability. The process of becoming president. Major and minor political parties nominate candidates for president and vice president at national conventions every 4 years. The nation's voters do not elect a president and vice president directly, but cast ballots for presidential electors, who then vote for president and vice president in the Electoral College. Y'all know what Electoral College is? Electoral College, in the US, a body of people representing the states of the US who formally cast votes for the election of the president and vice president. A body of electors chosen or appointed by a larger group. What is the Electoral College? Simple definition: the United States Electoral College is a name used to describe the official 538 presidential electors who come together every 4 years during the presidential election to give their official votes for the president and vice president of the United States, usually voting for the popular vote, most voted person. Twice, the Electoral College has failed to give any candidates a majority. At this point, the election is decided in the House of Representatives. The president is then chosen from among the 3 candidates having the most Electoral College votes, as noted in Chapter 9. Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr tied in the Electoral College in 1800 because the Constitution had not been explicit in indicating which of the 2 electoral votes were for president and which were for vice president. In 1804, the 12th Amendment clarified that matter, or the matter, by requiring that the president and vice president be chosen separately. In 1824, the House again had to make a choice, this time among William H. Crawford, Andrew Jackson, and John Quincy Adams. It chose Adams, even though Jackson had more electoral and popular votes. The many roles of the president. Explain the formal and informal roles played by the president and discuss the constitutional or political origins of those roles. The Constitution speaks briefly about the duties and obligations of the president. Based on this brief list of powers and on the precedent of history, the presidency has grown into a very complicated job that requires balancing at least 5 constitutional roles. Number 1, head of state. Number 2, chief executive. Number 3, commander-in-chief of the armed forces. Number 4, chief diplomat. And number 5, chief legislator of the United States. It is worth noting that one person plays all these roles simultaneously and that these roles may at times come into conflict. For example, President Obama, in his role as commander-in-chief, used drones to find and eliminate leaders of Al-Qaeda in Pakistan. As leader of the Democratic Party, however, he was critical of former President Bush for his war against terrorists and the creation of the prison at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Head of state. Every nation has at least one ceremonial head of state. In most democratic governments, the role of head of state is given to someone other than the chief executive who leads the executive branch of government. In Britain, the head of state is the Queen. In much of Europe, the Prime Minister is the chief executive, and the head of state is the president. But in the United States, the president is both the chief executive and head of state. According to William Howard Taft, as head of state, the president symbolizes the dignity and majesty of the American people. As head of state, the president engages in many activities that are largely symbolic or ceremonial, such as decorating war heroes, throwing out the first pitch to open the baseball season, dedicating national parks and opening new factories, receiving visiting hands of the state at the White House, representing the nation at times of national mourning, such as after the terrorist attack of September 11, 2001, after the murder of the school children at Sandy Hook, and after the destruction from Hurricane Sandy in 2012. I have a picture of Barack Obama, and he is decorating or honoring one of the Navy seniors. It says here, President Obama awards the nation's highest honor, the Medal of Honor, to Navy Senior Chief Edward Byer Jr. for his effort to rescue an American hostage from Taliban in Afghanistan. Taliban. I want to show you a picture. Some believe that having the president serve as both the chief executive and the head of state drastically limits the time available to do real work. Not all presidents have agreed with this conclusion. However, particularly those presidents who have skillfully blended these two roles with their role as politician. Being head of state gives the president tremendous public exposure, which can be important asset in the campaign for re-election. When that exposure is positive, it helps the president leverage Congress regarding the proposed legislation and increases the chances of being re-elected or getting candidates of president's party elected. Executive chief. So I kind of want to step back a little bit about head of state. I want to make sure that I'm retaining this information. It's like early in the morning. It's almost 11 o'clock. So sometimes my brain like goes in and out, which is not a very good thing. So I want to go back and just make sure that I'm understanding everything. Again, this is study time. We're learning about the president, and I'm just kind of first time reading this information. And so there's going to be things I don't know. There's going to be words I don't know. And so I will stop, and I will definitely try to keep going as much as I can, but I definitely don't want to go on and I did not get the information that I needed from the text. So I know we read about the roles of the president. We mentioned that they have the 5 different roles. And so the first one was the head of state. The second one was the chief executive. The third one was the commander-in-chief of armed forces. The fourth one was the chief diplomat. And then the fifth one was the chief legislator, the chief legislator of the United States. So the chief diplomat, what is a diplomat? Do y'all know what that is? A diplomat. So I have here diplomatic. That's not what I want. I want a diplomat. And then it says an official representing of a country abroad. That's what a diplomat is. And then a chief legislator. So we know what a chief is. This says Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution of the United States grants the President of the United States the role of the chief legislator. As the chief legislator, the president is given the power to shape policy by asserting some influence over what Congress discusses and what bills it attempts to pass. So head of state is given to someone other than the chief executive, who leads the executive branch of government. So the president leads the executive branch of government. As head of state, the president engages in many activities that are largely symbolic or ceremonial, such as the following: decorating war heroes, throwing out the first pitch to open the baseball season. It sounds like a joke, but okay. Dedicating national parks and opening new factories. Receiving visiting heads of state at the White House. Representing the nation at times of national mourning. That's important. Such as after the terrorist attack of September 11th, 2001. It's nice to see the president during times like that, for sure. After the murder of the school children at Sandy Hook, and after the destruction from Hurricane Sandy in 2012. It's definitely good to see the president in those devastating times, for sure. Okay, so chief executive. So according to the Constitution, the executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States of America. He may require the opinion and writing of the principal officer in each of the executive departments upon any subject relating to the duties of their respective offices, and he shall nominate and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, shall appoint officers of the United States. He shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed. As chief executive, the president is continually bound to enforce the acts of Congress, the judgments of federal courts, and treaties signed by United States. The duty to faithfully execute the law has been a source of constitutional power for presidents. Is the president allowed to reject certain parts of legislation if he or she believes that they are unconstitutional? For at least 175 years, presidents have used signing statements, written declarations made by presidents that accompany legislation to make substantive constitutional pronouncements on the bill being signed. In 1830, President Andrew Jackson created a controversy when he signed a bill and at the same time sent to Congress a message that restricted the reach of the statute. President Abraham Lincoln, Andrew Johnson, Theodore Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, and Franklin Roosevelt all used signing statements. As for the legality of the practice, the Department of Justice has advised the last four administrations that the Constitution provides the president with the authority to decline to enforce a clearly unconstitutional law. For justice of the Supreme Court join in an opinion that the president may resist laws that encroach upon presidential powers by disregarding them when they are unconstitutional. After George W. Bush took office, he issued signing statements on more than 800 statutes, more than all of the previous presidents combined. He also tended to use the statements for a different purpose. When earlier presidents issued signing statements, they were used to instruct agencies on how to execute the laws and for similar purposes. Many, if not most, of the President Bush's signing statements served notice that he believed parts of the bill that he signed were unconstitutional or might violate national security. President Obama continued the practice of issuing signing statements to indicate his intentions with regard to legislation, although he used this tool only a few dozen times. Some members of Congress are not so concerned about presidential signing statements. Senator John Cornyn, RTX, in parentheses, has predicted that federal courts would be unlikely to consider the statements when interrupting the laws with which they were issued. So, I know in the government, they don't really like to change the Constitution a whole lot because it makes it weaker. And so they have these rules and things set in play. And so, we want to be confident in that and secure. So we don't want to keep changing things. You want something that's going to be consistent and something we can hold to a high standard and believe in and put our faith in. The powers of appointment and removal. To assist in the various tasks of the chief executive, the president has a federal bureaucracy, see Chapter 13, which consists of more than 2.7 federal civilian employees. The president only nominally runs the executive bureaucracy. Most government positions are filled by civil service employees who generally gain government employment through a merit system rather than presidential appointment. Therefore, even though the president has important appointment power, it is limited to cabinet and sub-cabinet jobs, federal judgeships, agency heads, and several thousand lesser jobs. Of more than 700,000 civilian jobs in the Department of Defense, the president may appoint fewer than 600, less than 0.1%. Although the president has 555 appointments available in the State Department, some are ambassadorships to important allies, usually given to major donors or supporters of the president. Soon after each presidential election, the government publishes a list of about 8,000 specific jobs in a volume titled The Plum Book, Policies and Supporting Positions. It is so called because these have long been considered plum jobs. The president's power to remove from office those officials who are not doing a good job or who do not agree with the president is not explicitly granted by the Constitution and have been limited with regard to certain agencies. In 1926, however, a Supreme Court decision prevented Congress from interfering with the president's ability to fire those executive branch officials whom the president had appointed with Senate approval. The president can remove the heads of 10 executive departments, all of the cabinet secretaries, and everyone who worked in the executive office of the president of the White House office. Harry Truman spoke candidly on the difficulties a president faces in trying to control the executive bureaucracy. On leaving office, he refers to the problems that Dwight Eisenhower, as a former general of the Army, was going to have. He'll sit here and he'll do this, do that, and nothing will happen. Poor Ike. It won't be a bit like the Army. He'll find it very frustrating. The power to grant reprieves and pardons. Act 2 of Article 2 of the Constitution gives the president the power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. What is reprieves? Y'all know what that is? Reprieves. I have cancel or postpone the punishment of someone, especially someone condemned to death. I'll play the Platonics.
Reprieve.
Oh, it's reprieve. I didn't say it correctly. I said reprieve. It's reprieve.
Reprieve.
And that means to cancel or postpone the punishment of someone. So it says, I'll reread, the power to grant reprieves or pardons. What is pardon? Pardon. The action of forgiving or being forgiven for an error or offense. So it says the power to grant reprieve or pardons. We said reprieve means to cancel or postpone the punishment of someone, especially someone condemned to death. And then pardon is the action of forgiving or being forgiven for error or offense. Article 2 of the Constitution, Section 2, Article 2 of the Constitution gives the president the power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. All pardons are administered by the Office of the Pardon Attorney in the Department of Justice. The U.S. Supreme Court upheld the president's power to grant reprieves and pardons in a 1925 case concerning a pardon granted by the president to an individual convicted of contempt of court. The judiciary had contended that only judges had the authority to convict individuals for contempt of court when court orders were violated, and that the court should be free from interference by the executive branch. The court stated that the president could grant reprieves or pardons for all offenses, either before trial, during trial, or after trial, by individuals or by classes, conditionally or absolutely, and this without modification or regulation by Congress. The power to pardon can also be used to apply to large groups of individuals who may be subject to indictment and trial. In 1977, President Jimmy Carter extended amnesty to all Vietnam War resistors who avoided the military draft by fleeing to Canada. More than 50,000 individuals were allowed to come back to the United States, free from the possibility of prosecution. The power to reprieve individuals allow the president to extend clemency to federal prisoners, usually on humanitarian grounds. However, in 1999, President Bill Clinton extended a conditional offer of clemency to a group of Puerto Rican nationalists who have been tried for planning terrorist attacks in the United States. The condition was for them to renounce the use of terrorist attacks and not associate with other nationalists who advocate violence. 12 accept the offer, whereas 2 refuse the condition. In the controversial decision, President Gerald Ford pardoned former President Nixon for the role in the Watergate affair before any charges were brought in court. President Obama pardoned 70 individuals by 2016, fewer than most modern presidents. However, he commuted the sentence of more than 200 prisoners, most of whom were serving long sentences for drug-related crimes. The president explained his rationale for these commutations by noting that these individuals would have much shorter sentences if convicted of the same offenses today. Communication to not declare the person innocent, but can shorten the individual's sentence. So there was a few words that I like to go back and just kind of take a closer look at, and that's indictment, amnesty, and clemency. So the first one is indictment. Indictment, indictment. Y'all know what that means? I have a formal charge or accusation of a serious crime. I'll use the Platonics to hear how it's pronounced.
Indictment.
Indictment. And again, indictment is a formal charge or accusation of a serious crime. And then amnesty is an official pardon for people who have been convicted of political offenses.
Amnesty.
Amnesty. An official pardon. So forgiveness for people who have been convicted of political offenses. And then the last one was clemency. Y'all know what that is?
Clemency.
That means mercy or lenience. So if you're convicted, you can receive a pardon or forgiveness or clemency. Commander-in-Chief, demonstrate an understanding of the President's powers as Commander-in-Chief and the procedures described in the War Powers Act. The President, according to the Constitution, shall be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and of the militia of the several states. When called into action service of the United States, the armed forces are under civilian rather than military control. Wartime powers. Certainly, those who wrote the Constitution had George Washington in mind when they made the President the Commander-in-Chief. The founders did not, however, expect presidents to lead the country into war without congressional authorization. Remember that Congress is given the power to declare war. As the United States grew in the military power and global reach, presidents became much more likely to send troops into the armed combat, either in crisis situations or with an authorizing resolution short of the declaration of war. The last war to be fought under the Congressional Declaration was World War II. Although we did not expect our president to lead the troops into battle, presidents as commanders-in-chief have wielded dramatic power. President Truman made the difficult decision to drop atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945 to force Japan to surrender and thus bring World War II to an end. President Johnson ordered bombing missions against North Vietnam in the 1960s, and he personally selected some of the targets. President Nixon decided to invade Cambodia in 1970, an action widely condemned as an abuse of his power as commander-in-chief. The president is the ultimate decision maker in the military matters and has the final authority to launch a nuclear strike using missiles or bombs. For decades, the nuclear football, a briefcase filled with all codes necessary to order a nuclear attack, accompanied the president. Today, nuclear security codes are uploaded to a website protected by retinal scan technology, which can only be accessed by the president. Only the president can order the use of nuclear force. The use of military force by presidents has raised some very thorny issues for their balance between Congress and the presidency. President Truman sent U.S. troops to Korea under a United Nations resolution, and President Johnson escalated the U.S. involvement in Vietnam under the quickly passed Gulf of Tonkin resolution. President Bush invaded Iraq with congressional authorization. In none of these did Congress and the public expect extended wars with many casualties. Presidents have also used military force without any congressional authorization, particularly in emergency situations. Ronald Reagan sent troops to Grenada to stop a supposedly communist coup, and Lyndon Johnson invaded the Dominican Republic. George H.W. Bush sent troops to Panama. Numerous presidents have ordered quick airstrikes on perceived enemies, and Barack Obama ordered the Navy SEAL team into Pakistan to capture Osama bin Laden. The War Powers Resolution. In an attempt to gain more control over such military activities, in 1973, Congress passed the War Powers Resolution over President Nixon's veto, requiring that the president consult with Congress when sending American forces into action. Once they are sent, the president must report to Congress within 48 hours, unless Congress approves the use of troops within 60 days or extends the 60-day time limit. The forces must be withdrawn. The War Powers Resolution was tested in the fall of 1983 when Reagan requested the troops remain in Lebanon. The resulting compromise was a congressional resolution allowing troops to remain there for 18 months. Despite the War Powers Resolution, the powers of President as Commander-in-Chief have continued to expand. The attack of September 11, 2001 were the first on U.S. soil since Pearl Harbor. The imminent sense of threat supported passage of legislation that gave the president and the executive branch powers that had not been since World War II. President Bush's use of surveillance powers and other powers granted by the Patriot Act that have caused considerable controversy. In the face of continued terrorist threats, President Obama signed extensions of the Patriot Act and continued many of the actions of the Bush administration. The Obama administration ordered hundreds of drone strikes on terrorist leaders or encampments, skirting and provisions of the War Powers Resolution because no American troops are involved in a combat situation when drones are used. Chief Diplomat. The Constitution gives the president the power to recognize foreign governments, to make treaties with the advice and consent of the Senate, to make special agreements with other heads of state that do not require congressional approval, and to nominate ambassadors. As chief diplomat, the president dominates American foreign policy, a role supported many times by the Supreme Court. Diplomatic recognition. An important power of the president as chief diplomat is that of diplomatic recognition, or the power to recognize or refuse to recognize foreign governments. In the role of ceremonial head of state, the president has always received foreign diplomats. In modern times, the simple act of receiving a foreign diplomat has been equivalent and accrediting the diplomat, an official recognizing his or her government. Such recognition of the legitimacy of another country's government is a prerequisite to diplomatic relations or other treaties between the country and the United States. Deciding when to recognize a foreign power is not always simple. The United States did not recognize the Soviet Union until 1933, 16 years after the Russian Revolution of 1917. Only after all attempts to reverse the effect that the revolution proved futile, including military invasion of Russia and diplomatic isolation, did Franklin Roosevelt extend recognition to the Soviet government. U.S. president faced a similar problem with the Chinese Communist Revolution. In December 1978, long after the Communist victory in China in 1949, Jimmy Carter finally granted official recognition to the People's Republic of China. After his re-election in 2012, President Obama opened secret negotiations with Cuba aimed at eventually restoring diplomatic relations with the Caribbean nation. The United States closed its embassy and placed an embargo on Cuban goods after Fidel Castro took power in 1959. After several years of meeting, President Obama announced in 2014 the diplomatic relations would be restored, and in 2016 he visited Cuba and proposed stronger economic and social ties to the Cuban people. When governments are toppled by protests, the president often faces a diplomatic recognition issue. During the Arab Spring, a new government was put in place in Egypt and recognized by the United States. In countries such as Libya, where the central government is not recognized by many national or regional leaders, the question becomes who to recognize as the official head of government. Proposal and ratification of treaties. The president has the scale power to negotiate treaties with other nations. These treaties must be presented to the Senate, where they might or may be modified and must be approved by a two-thirds vote. After ratification, the president can approve the senatorial version of the treaty. Approval poses a problem when the Senate has added substantive amendments and reservations to a treaty, particularly when such changes may require reopening negotiations while the other signatory governments. A president may decide to withdraw a treaty if changes are too extensive, as Woodrow Wilson did in the Versailles Treaty in 1990. Wilson believed that the senatorial reservations would weaken the treaty so much that it would be eventually refusal of the United States to join the League of Nations. President Carter was successful in lobbying for the treaties that provided for the return of the Panama Canal to Panama by the year of 2000 and for naturalizing the canal. President Clinton won a major political and legislative victory in 1933 by persuading Congress to ratify the North American Free Trade Amendment or Agreement, NAFTA. In so doing, he had to overcome opposition from Democrats and most of organized labor. In 1998, he worked closely with Senate Republicans to ensure Senate approval of the treaty governing the use of chemical weapons. In 2000, he won another major legislative victory when Congress voted to normalize trade relations with China permanently. How y'all doing? I feel so tired. Do you see my eyes? I feel like they're like sagging right now. So I read a little bit about the War Power Resolution, and then we know that the president is able to send the troops out to war, but then they have to notify Congress within a certain time frame. So if we're under attack, like the September 11th attack, the president can say, hey, I need my military troops to go out here to this location, and then they'll go, but then the president has to notify Congress within the 48 hours. And then there's also the diplomatic recognition. And diplomatic recognition is the formal acknowledgement of foreign governments as legitimate. So, formal acknowledgement is more like a professional way of doing things. I'm just kind of making that up right now because I know formal, you can think informal is more like a casual, informal is more like dressed up, like it's better, like it's a more professional version. But it says here for diplomatic recognition, an important power of the president as chief diplomat is that the diplomatic recognition or the power to recognize or refuse to recognize foreign governments. So, in the role of ceremonial head of state, the president has always received foreign diplomats. In modern times, act of receiving foreign diplomats has been equivalent to accrediting the diplomat and officially recognizing his or her government. Such recognition of the legitimacy of another's country government is a prerequisite to diplomatic relations or treaties between the country and the United States. So we know, like, if we're doing treaties, that's like, I think, like making peace, right? What's a treaty? It says here a formally concluded and ratified agreement between countries. So making a settlement, an official agreement intended to resolve dispute. Okay, and then I read a little bit about the proposal and ratification of treaties. Do y'all know what a proposal is? So a proposal is a plan or a suggestion, especially a formal or written one, put forward for consideration or discussion by others. I'll play the Platonics to make sure I'm saying it right.
Proposal.
Proposal. So a plan or a suggestion, especially a formal or written one. There's that word formal again. And then for formal, actually have done in accordance with rules of convention or etiquette. So done in accordance with rules of convention or etiquette, suitable for or constituting an official, important situation or occasion. It's formal. And then ratification. Do y'all know what ratification is? For ratification, I have the action of signing or giving formal consent to a treaty, contract, or agreement, making it officially valid. I'll play the Platonics.
Ratification.
Ratification, the action of signing or giving formal consent. Formal, there's that word formal again. Formal consent to treaty, contract, or agreement, making it officially valid. So proposal, do you remember what proposal is? A plan or a suggestion, especially a formal or written one. So a written plan for ratification, action of signing or giving formal consent to a treaty, contract, or agreement. Of treaties, making peace. We said treaties was making peace. So we talked a little bit about wars. We talked a little bit about making peace, formally with other nations, so we know president can send the troops out. So there's wartime powers that the president has. The president has the power to reprieve or to pardon. So reprieve is a formal postponement, the executive of a sentence imposed by court of law. So, and then they can pardon to release from punishment. So they can postpone, which is reprieve, or they can release from punishment. The president has power to do that. The president has civil service, collective term from a body of employees working for the government. So they work for the government. And then there's different positions that fill the civil service. Employees who generally gain government employment through a merit system rather than presidential appointment. So federal judgeship, agency heads, several thousand leaser jobs. So the chief executive, the role of the president, head, and the executive branch of government. Signing statements, a written declaration that a president may make when signing a bill into law. So the president can sign a bill into law. Usually such statements point out sections of the law that the president deems unconstitutional. And then the president also decorates war heroes. We talked about that. Every nation has at least one ceremonial head of state. In most democratic governments, the role of head of state is given to someone rather than chief executive who leads executive branch of government. In Britain, the head of state is the Queen. In the United States, the president is both chief executive and head of state. We're learning, right? All right, so I'm still on the section of proposal and ratification of treaties. It says President George W. Bush indicated his intention to steer the United States in a more unilateral direction of foreign policy. He rejected the Kyoto Agreement on global warming and proposed ending the 1972 Anti-Ballistic Missile (ABM) treaty that was part of the first Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, SALT I. After the terrorist attack of September 11, 2001, however, President Bush sought cooperation from U.S. allies in the war on terrorism. Bush's return to unilateralism was exemplified in the signing of the Nuclear Weapons Reduction Treaty with Russia in 2002. The Obama administration quickly signaled a new outlook in foreign policy, with the president making multiple trips overseas, including to Egypt. In his first year in office, President Obama stated goals in foreign policy, including more cooperative approach to world affairs and to reduction of nuclear weapons for the nation. In 2010, President signed a treaty with Russia for a joint reduction of long-range nuclear weapons. The new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty START was ratified by the U.S. Senate late that year and went into force in 2011. The Obama administration used a very different strategy to get approval of the agreement with Iran to limit its development of nuclear powers or nuclear weapons. Rather than negotiating the two-nation treaty, negotiations involved a multi-nation team, including Russia, China, the United States, and several European powers. After the agreement with Iran was hammered out, it was sent to the United Nations and the UN treaty and anonymously approved in the Security Council. Early in his term, President Trump threatened to withdraw from Iran agreement. In 2018, he formally withdrew the reimposed sanction on the Iranian government. So executive agreements, presidential power in foreign affairs is enhanced greatly by the use of executive agreements made between the president and the other heads of state. Such agreements do not require the Senate's approval, although the House and the Senate may refuse to appropriate the funds necessary to implement them, whereas treaties are binding on all succeeding administrations. Executive agreement require each new president's consent to remain effective. Among the advantages of the executive agreements are speed and secrecy. The former is essential during the crisis. The latter is important when open senatorial debate may be detrimental to the best interests of the United States and to interests of the president. Executive agreement about 13,000 greatly outnumbered treaties, about 1,300. Many executive agreements contain secret provisions calling for American military assistance or other support. Franklin Roosevelt used executive agreements to bypass congressional isolationists when he traded American destroyers for British Caribbean naval bases and when he arranged diplomatic and military affairs with Canada and Latin American nations. Chief Legislator 12.3 discuss the president's role in the legislative process. Describe executive tools to initiate or block legislation. So constitutionally, presidents must recommend to Congress legislation that they judge necessary to and expedite. Not all presidents have wielded their powers as chief legislator in the same manner. Some have been almost completely unsuccessful in getting their legislative programs implemented by Congress. President Franklin Roosevelt and Lyndon Johnson, however, saw much of their proposed legislation put into effect. Each year, the Congressional Quarterly Weekly Review publishes an analysis of presidential success in terms of legislation passed that the president has publicly supported. As shown in Figure 2.1, presidents tend to have high success rates at the beginning of their administration with a steep decline toward the end of the term. George W. Bush had more than 70% success rates during the year, and he's had a Republican-controlled Congress, but it fell to 34% after the Democrats won control of Congress in the 2006 election. President Obama earned the highest success score ever recorded for president in the first year, 96.7%. After the Republicans won the House of Representatives in 2010, his success fell rate to 57% and declined further in the later years of his presidency. In the first year, Donald Trump achieved success rated 98.7%, although he took public position only on a small number of bills. In modern time, okay, I'm sorry, I'm not going to go. I was going to say something about like, how in the world did Trump just kind of succeed Obama like that? Like, really? Is it because he's black? Like, did he have to go up a couple percentages? Like, really? I'm just saying. We all know Obama was like really cool. And it makes sense that the numbers drop because once you get like reelected, you can only be elected 2 terms. So And it makes sense for Donald Trump to like get elected, you know. And I guess you think like you're going against Hillary Clinton, which is a female. And so you think of it as that aspect is like, do you want a female who happens to be like the first lady? Like, okay, she was married to Bill Clinton, and she actually has her JD, the same as Barack Obama, where they actually finished getting their doctorates like in law. It's like a JD is what it's called. And so Hillary Clinton got her JD also. And so she's very intelligent. It's called Jurist. Here I have it like written down, a JD. It's somewhere around here. So it's basically like when you go like to law school and like you finish the program and then you get your degree, and it's a new name for it. I am like so tired. It's called a oh my gosh. Oh, it's a JD. It's called a Juris Doctor. JURIS Doctor. So she received hers also. Like, so she's like really smart and she's like a go-getter. She's had like so many positions and everything. But she's also a female, and you know, she's married to a president. And so it's like, okay, are we gonna put your wife as president? And she's gonna be like, or are we gonna put this guy that's a male who's a white male and he's 70, so he's old and he's rich. He has all this money and he's good with business. Like, who are we going to pick? And of course, they end up voting Donald Trump, and he won 98.7% over Hillary Clinton. So that's interesting. That's the president success rate. Anyways, moving on. So it says in the president's annual State of the Union message, which is required by the Constitution, Article 2, Section 3 is usually given in the late January. Shortly after Congress reconvenes, the president, as chief legislator, presents a program. The message gives a broad, comprehensive view of what the president wishes the legislator to accomplish during the session. Originally, president sent a written memo to Congress which satisfies the constitutional requirements. In modern times, however, presidents see the State of the Union addressed as tools to advance their policy agenda. The president is able to command the media message and set out his or her goals. The president is able to command the media message and set out his or her goals. President Reagan began to practice of referring to ordinary citizens and bringing the subjects to those stories to sit in the balcony during the speech. Today, the president, the opposition party, and the commentators all recognize the impact of the State of the Union message on public opinion. So legislation passed. The president can propose legislation, but Congress is not required to pass or even introduce any of the administration bills. How then does the president get proposal made into law? One way is by persuasion. The president writes to telephones and meets with various congressional leaders, makes public announcements to influence public opinion, and as head of the party, exercise legislative leadership through the congresspersons of that party. Most presidents have an official and congressional liaison within the White House office. Such an office is staffed by individuals with extensive Washington experience, including former members of Congress who lobby Congress on behalf of the president and monitor progress of legislation on Capitol Hill. Presidents may also decide to use social events to lobby Congress, inviting the members of their spouses and parties at the White House. A more negative strategy is for the president to threaten to veto legislation if it does not correspond to his or her position. Saying no to legislation. The president has the power to say no to legislation through use of the veto, by which the White House returns the bill unsigned to Congress with a veto message attached. Because the Constitution requires that every bill passed by the House and Senate be sent to the President before it becomes a law, the President must act on each bill. Number one, if the bill is signed, it becomes law. Number two, if the bill is not sent back to Congress after 10 congressional working days, it becomes law without the president's signature. Number three, the president can reject the bill and send it back to Congress with a veto message setting forth objections. Congress can change the bill, hoping to secure presidential approval and pass it again, or Congress can simply reject the president's objections by overriding the veto with a 2/3 votes recall vote of the members present in both the House and the Senate. Number four, if the president refuses to sign a bill and Congress adjourns within 10 working days after the bill has been submitted to the president, the bill is killed for that session of Congress. This is called a pocket veto. If Congress wishes the bill to be reconsidered, the bill must be reintroduced during the following session. Presidents employed the veto power infrequently until the Civil War, but it has been used with increasing vigor since then. See Table 2.1. Millard Fillmore served 1850-1853, was the last president to serve full-time in office without exercising the veto power. Only 9 bills were vetoed by President Obama when control of Congress was split between 2 parties. He issued only 2 vetoes because most measures opposed by the president did not pass Congress. After the Republicans gained control of both houses in 2015, President Obama vetoed 7 more bills. The line item veto. Ronald Reagan lobbied strenuously for Congress to provide the president with the line item veto, which would allow the president to veto specific spending provisions of legislation that were passed by Congress. In 1996, Congress passed the Line Item Veto Act, signed by President Clinton. The law granted the president the power to resign any item in an appropriation bill unless Congress passed a resolution of disapproval. The congressional resolution could be, in turn, vetoed by the president. The law did not make effect until the 1996 election. The act was soon challenged in court as an unconstitutional delegation of legislative powers to executive branch. In 1998, by 6-3 votes, the U.S. Supreme Court agreed to overturn the act. The court stated that there is no provision in the Constitution that authorized the president to enact, to amend, or to repeal statutes. Congress's power to override presidential vetoes. A veto is a clear-cut indication of the president's dissatisfaction with congressional legislation. Congress, however, can override a presidential veto, although it rarely exercises this power. 2/3 of the members of the chambers who are present must vote to override the president's veto in a roll call vote. This means that if only 1/3 plus 1 of the members voting in the House or Senate do not agree to override the veto. The veto holds, someone's calling me. The veto holds Congress first overrode a presidential veto during the administration of John Taylor, served 1841. I'm sorry, this is going to be like a bill collector. Hello? Hello?
May I speak with Erica?
I'm sorry, you have the wrong number.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm sorry for the inconvenience, okay?
Okay,
By the way, for your time. Have a good day.
bye-bye. Do y'all get phone calls? It's like, I don't know who you are. I don't know what you're selling me. Do y'all get those phone calls? I get phone calls. I don't even know these people. Someone wants to be my friend on Facebook. That's a dual Islam. I get a lot of foreigners and a lot of older men. It's so weird. Anyways, I'm on this, I'm like accepting like everybody now. There was a time I was very selective of my friends because they say who you hang around is who you become. And so like I was very selective on who I like add on Facebook as a friend. But now I'm just like, whatever, I'm just gonna accept anyone. Anyways, I am so tired, y'all. And I'm almost done. It's almost 12 o'clock. I have class at 1 o'clock. So I think I'm gonna finish this section and then I'm just gonna stop. I'm gonna stop. I think that's a good idea. I'm almost done though. We got through a lot of it. All right, so I read Congress power to override presidential vetoes. I'm going to get a drink. I'm sorry. I am like tired. I should have got coffee today. That would have been like a really good idea to get some coffee to wake me up because I'm dragging. All right, let's finish this small portion here. It says Congress's power to override presidential vetoes. A veto is a clear-cut indication of the president's dissatisfaction with congressional legislation. Congress, however, can override a presidential veto, although it rarely exercises this power. 2/3 of the members of each chamber who are present must vote to override the president's veto in a roll call vote. This means that if only 1/3 plus one of the members voting in the House or Senate do not agree to override the veto holds. Congress first overrode the presidential veto during the administration of John Tyler, served 1841 to 1845. Overall, only about 7% of all regular vetoes have been overridden. Other presidential powers. The powers of the president just discussed are constitutional powers because their basis lies in the Constitution. In addition, Congress has established by law a statute numerous other presidential powers, such as the ability to declare national emergencies. These are statutory powers. Both constitutional and statutory powers have been labeled the express powers of the president because they are expressly written into the Constitution or into law. Presidents also have what have come to be known as inherent powers. These depend on the statements in the Constitution that executive powers shall be vested in a president and that the president should take care that the laws be faithfully executed. The most common example of inherent powers are those emergency powers invoked by the president during wartime. Franklin Roosevelt used his inherent powers to move Japanese and Japanese Americans living in the United States into internment camps. for the duration of World War II. Clearly, modern U.S. presidents have many powers at their disposal. According to the critics, among the powers exercised by modern presidents are certain powers that rightfully belong to Congress, but that Congress has yielded to the executive branch. So the next section is the president as party chief and super politician. Presidents are by no means above political partisanship, and one of their many roles is that of chief of party. Although the Constitution says nothing about the function of the president within a political party, the mere concept of political parties was abhorrent to most of the Constitution's authors. Today's presidents are the actual leaders of their parties. The president as chief of party. As a party leader, the president chooses the national committee chairperson and tries to discipline party members who fail to support presidential parties. One of the exerting political powers is through patronage, appointing political supporters to government or public jobs. This power was more extensive in the past, before the establishment of the civil service in 1883. But the president retains important patronage power. The president can appoint several thousand individuals to job in the cabinet, the White House, embassies, and the federal regulatory agencies. Perhaps the most important partisan role that the president has played in recent decades is that of fundraiser. The president is able to raise large amounts for the party through appearance at dinners, speaking engagements, and other social occasions. President Clinton may have raised more than $500 million for the Democratic Party during his 2 terms. President George W. Bush was even more successful than President Clinton. President Barack Obama continued the trend of fundraising for his party, raising money for members of Congress in 2012 and 2016. The president may also make it known that a particular congressperson's choice for federal judge will not be appointed unless that member of Congress is more supportive of the president's legislative program. The president may agree to campaign for a particular program or for a particular candidate. Presidents also reward loyal members of Congress with support for the fundraising of local projects, tax breaks for local industries, invitations to fly in Air Force One, and other forms of social recognition. The president's power to persuade. According to the political scientist Richard E. Newstanden, without the power to persuade, no president can lead well. After all, even though the president is in news virtually every day, the Constitution gives Congress most of the authority in the U.S. political system. The Constitution does not give executive branch enough constitutional power to firmly establish the president in a strong leadership position. Therefore, the president must establish a professional representation that will convince Congress, the bureaucracy, and the public to support the president's agenda. As Newstanden argues, presidential power is the power to persuade. The next session is the constituency of public approval. A politician's worry about their constituencies. Presidents with high approval ratings are able to leverage those ratings with members of Congress who would prefer not to vote against the opinions of their own constituents. Presidential constituencies, according to Newstanden, president, have not just one constituency, but many. They are beholding the entire electorate, the public of the United States, even those who did not vote. They are beholden to their party because its members help to put them in office. The president's constituencies often include members of the opposing party whose cooperation the president needs. Finally, the president must take it into consideration a constituency that has come to be called the Washington community. The community consists of individuals who, whether in or out of political office, are familiar with the working of government, thrive on gossip, and measure on a daily basis the political power of the president. And I'm going to stop there, and then we're going to pick it up later and talk about public approval, and then George W. Bush and the public opinion polls, and then the Obama and Trump public approval. And then we're going to go into the special uses of presidential powers and emergency powers and executive orders, and then executive privileges and limited privileges. Then we're going to talk about the executive organization, and then the cabinet, and then the executive office of president. And then I think we will be almost done. We're going to talk about the vice president, jobs of the vice president. And then we're going to talk about the 25th Amendment. And we're going to talk about, that's it. So we're almost done. It looks like we have 53, 40, 3, 4. We have like 9 more pages, and then that's it. So that's not a whole lot. So we got through like a lot of it. Well, I thank you so much for your time. I'm going to cut the video here. I have class in about an hour, so I'm going to go over some information before class. But thank you for spending your time with me today. I hope that y'all learned something. Take care. Bye-bye.